Where in the world are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments. Before we dive into this heartwarming story, hit subscribe so you'll never miss the most courageous dog tales we share every day. The forest holds a lot of secrets. It can swallow a car whole, leaving no trace. It can muffle a whisper until it's nothing but a ghost of a sound. But what if a whisper isn't just a sound? What if it's a plea? A cry for help, so faint, so hidden, that only a true hero, one with 4 paws and a heart of gold, could hear it. This is the true story of Ranger Julian Thorne, a man who thought he had lost everything, and his loyal Labrador. Leo, a dog who proved that the most powerful instincts are often the ones we can't see but can only feel. This story isn't just about a rescue. It's a terrifying journey into a world hidden in plain sight, a world of shadows, secrets, and a sinister conspiracy. A journey that all began with a whisper in the woods and a dog who refused to stay silent. Julian wasn't a ranger by choice. He was one by necessity. After a tactical operation went sideways, leaving a hole in his soul and a weight on his conscience, the quiet solitude of Jasper National Park became his penance. His only partner, his only lifeline, was Leo, a golden Labrador with a soul as old as the mountains they patrolled. Leo wasn't just a retired K9, he was the living, breathing reminder of who Julian used to be, and the only creature who knew the full measure of his grief. Their days were a routine of sun-drenched trails and whispered commands. But on one particular Tuesday, everything changed. The air was heavy, not with the promise of rain, but with a palpable sense of unease. Julian felt it, but it was Leo who reacted. Leo, usually a picture of gentle grace, froze. His tail, a metronome of his happiness, went still. His head tilted and his ears, like 2 golden spears, pointed toward a thicket of tangled pine. Julian held his breath. He strained to hear something, anything, but the forest was silent. He dismissed it as a squirrel or a stray deer, a common mistake we all make to rely on what we can see and hear instead of what we can feel. But Leo didn't move. He stood rigid, his gaze locked on something beyond the tree line. And then it came. A sound so faint, so unnatural, it could have been a trick of the wind. A child's cry. Not the kind of whimper you hear from a kid who's lost a toy. This was deeper, hollow, like it had been echoing for hours, maybe days. It was a sound that shattered the forest's tranquility and Julian's fragile peace. Julian unclipped Leo's leash, a silent command passing between them. The old dog, a dozen years on this earth, moved with the speed and precision of a missile. Leaves snapped, branches cracked, and then 3 short, sharp barks. Leo's emergency code. Something was wrong. Heart pounding, Julian crashed through the underbrush until he saw it, an old silver sedan, half swallowed by the forest. It was a ghost car, coated in grime and pine needles, its windshield foggy from the inside. Leo stood growling softly near the back passenger window, his usually calm demeanor replaced by an intense focus that Julian hadn't seen since their active duty days. And then Julian saw it too. A small hand, no bigger than a sapling leaf, pressed against the grimy glass. A pale, dirt-streaked face. Julian's gut twisted. He pulled out his radio, calling in a possible child endangerment, but he knew he wasn't going to wait. He tried the door, but it was locked. So with a deep breath and a prayer, he smashed the window with his baton. The smell hit first old urine, something rotten, and the metallic tang of decay. And then the sound, a shallow, rasping breath from the boy inside as he shrank back, terrified. Hey, easy, Julian said, gently reaching in. I'm here to help. He carefully slid the child out. The boy was barefoot, his wrists marked with faint red lines. And that's when the first twist of the knife came. The boy spoke. Not a cry, not a scream, but a single chilling whisper. They said I was going on the ferry. Julian froze. A ferry. This was a national park, miles from any coastline. The words made no sense yet. They held a profound, unsettling weight. This wasn't a random act of violence. It was part of a plan. An operation. We as a society often make the mistake of looking at a problem and seeing only its surface. We see a lost child, a broken car, and we draw simple conclusions. But Julian, guided by the instinct of his dog, was now seeing something far more complex. He was seeing the first thread of a conspiracy, and he had no idea just how deep it went. The story of the lost boy and the loyal dog was just beginning. And in the next part of our tale, we will uncover a web of lies hidden in plain sight, with a simple drawing that will reveal a villain far more cunning than anyone could have imagined. The boy, whose name was Emiliano, was a ghost. He had no name, no ID, and didn't match any missing person reports. In the hospital, he wouldn't speak to anyone, nurses, doctors, or the child psychologist who drove in from Atlanta. But he would sit quietly if Storm stayed in the room. So Julian stayed too, watching from a corner as the boy curled up against the old German shepherd like they had known each other for years. This was the first clue, not for the police, but for Julian. Emiliano trusted Storm, and by extension, he trusted Julian. But what was it about the boy that was so different? The psychologist told Julian, he doesn't talk, but he knows things. He's drawing like someone twice his age. It was a profound observation that Julian couldn't shake. Leaving Emiliano in Storm's watchful care, Julian drove back to the woods. The sedan had been towed and impounded, but Julian knew the forest held more secrets. He parked along the tree line and hiked in with Storm trotting beside him, the dog moving with a renewed purpose, his nose to the ground. Storm suddenly growled and dug his paws into the dirt beneath the rear bumper of the tow truck. Tucked between the wheel well and the inner panel was a black zippered pouch. Inside, Julian found 3 fake passports, all with different names and nationalities, a wad of foreign currency, and a USB drive with no label. The passports all had photos of children, none older than 8. This was more than a local kidnapping. This was a trafficking ring operating right under their noses. Julian didn't call it in, not yet. He knew if he did, the evidence might be lost in the bureaucracy, just like the private contractors and redacted files from his past. That night, Julian couldn't sleep. The boy's face haunted him, as did his whispered words. They were going to take me on the boat. He pulled out the pouch again and stared at the passports. Storm, lying at his feet, watched him with wide-open eyes. You feel it too, don't you? Julian whispered. The dog's tail thumped once, a silent agreement. The next morning, Julian met his former FBI tech analyst friend Reggie. Julian placed the flash drive and the laminated cards on the table. Reggie frowned, saying, "This looks like something you'd find in a black market catalog." After running the data, Reggie found that one of the cards returned a hit from a flagged customs scan in Miami 2 years ago, while another was flagged in New Jersey. Both listed the children as non-identified minors who were never claimed and then transferred. This was a system tracking children without names, a terrifying realization. Then, Reggie put the flash drive into a separate laptop. It booted up instantly, revealing a folder labeled Movements and a spreadsheet titled Cargo 213B. The folder contained dozens of surveillance clips from inside a cargo container. In one video, Julian saw her a woman with a gray trench coat, sunglasses, and a long braid. The same woman Emiliano had drawn. Julian left the hospital shaken. He sat in his truck, staring at the ocean of cars in the parking lot. The fake passports, the drawing, and now the coordinates and cargo logs, it was all lining up. This wasn't just a drop point. It was a relay station. A sinister, sprawling network with a clear leader. With the image of the woman seared into his mind, Julian returned to the hospital. Emiliano was awake with Storm on the bed beside him. Julian showed the boy the photo of the 3 children they had found, and Emiliano pointed to Mila and Rosa. When Julian asked who the 3rd child was, the boy whispered, "He's still in the red place." He then pointed to a drawing he had made of a red snake coiled around a globe and whispered, "The place with the snake door." Julian's stomach twisted. This symbol was on one of the fake passports. This wasn't a local issue anymore. It was war. Julian pulled out his phone, typed one word into his secure messaging app, Activate. The quiet investigation was over. Julian knew he had to act. Julian couldn't shake the image of Emiliano's drawing from his mind. The woman with the braid, the red snake symbol. It all felt terrifyingly real. By sunrise, the gears were already turning. Julian, running on pure adrenaline and bad coffee, was back at the sheriff's office staring at a corkboard full of pinned photos and coordinates. Storm, now more alert than ever, paced near the entrance, ready to move. So was Julian. Sheriff Daniels, a man of small-town patience, looked up from the short report Julian had submitted through back channels, his face grim. "You're saying there's a trafficking ring operating out of Georgia Woodlands, and they're using federal-style logistics to move kids like cargo, and they're doing it right under our noses," Julian replied, placing the metal case and the laminated cards on the table. "Bar-coded kids, a flash drive full of shipping logs and surveillance footage. Burned evidence near a hidden outpost in a national forest." Daniels picked up one of the cards, his face a mask of disbelief. "We'll need federal involvement," he muttered. "I already sent a ping through my old task force line," Julian said, his jaw tight. "Reggie's running more names through Interpol." Later that morning, Julian returned to the forest. But this time, they didn't go to the same clearing. Storm nose to the dirt led him deeper, weaving through cedar and pine like he knew exactly where to go. He was no longer just reacting to a scent. It was something else. Instinct. They hiked for nearly a mile beyond the original site until Storm suddenly stopped. He let out one short, sharp bark, then sat. Julian approached slowly, pulling back brush and thick weeds. Underneath the moss-covered boards was a trapdoor rusted and locked tight with a crossbar and padlock. Near the hinge was a marking barely visible, a snake wrapped around a globe. "Good boy," Julian whispered, his jaw clenched. He took photos, marked the GPS coordinates, and called Reggie on a secure line. "We found a structure, underground. Same symbol. Could be a bunker or storage hub." Reggie's voice came back urgent. "Hold off. I looped in a federal contact at DHS. You open that thing and we could lose our shot at prosecution if it's active. Let me do some digging first." Julian hesitated, every instinct screaming at him to open it. But he knew Reggie was right. He marked the entrance with biodegradable tape and backed out. Back in town, something felt off. A white SUV tailed him for 3 blocks before vanishing. Then came the call from the hospital. The nurse on duty had tried to reach him 4 times. "Noah," she said urgently, "there was a woman here. Said she was from Child Protective Services. She tried to sign the boy out." Julian's blood ran cold. "Did she touch him?" "No, but she stood outside his room for almost a minute, just watching him sleep." He hung up and sped to the hospital, Storm growling the moment they pulled into the parking lot. Inside, Julian scanned the security camera monitor. A freeze frame showed a woman walking toward the elevator, gray trench coat, sunglasses, long braid. The same woman from the surveillance footage. Julian rewound the footage, watching her pause outside Emiliano's room. Storm barked at the screen. "She's here," Julian muttered. "She's watching." That night, Julian stayed overnight with Storm curled near the boy's feet. Late in the night, Emiliano finally spoke again, his eyes wide in the dark. "I know her name," he whispered. "Whose name?" Julian leaned closer. "The lady with the braid. They called her Dalia. She was in charge of the Red Place." The boy's words sent a shiver down Julian's spine. The case was no longer just about finding a missing child. It was a personal war against Dalia, a ghost in the shadows who had now stepped into the light. Reggie's voice on the phone was devoid of his usual laid-back demeanor. "Found something. You're not going to like it." He told Julian that the snake symbol was tied to an offshore shell corporation, Etix's Holdings, and that this company had recently purchased a private dock and 3 adjacent warehouses in Savannah, Georgia. The buyer had used fake federal contracts, good fakes. And there was more. A private airstrip nearby had just filed a flight plan to Venezuela for the next night. The most chilling detail: a shipping container registered as inactive 2 years ago was listed in a log Cargo 213B, the same number as the folder on Julian's flash drive. Dalia was moving tonight. By late afternoon, Julian had linked up with the Homeland Security Task Force. They were an elite unit, hardened and professional, and they quietly reviewed the evidence. Julian had compiled the barcoded cards, the photos, the GPS locations. They agreed to a dual breach, one at the warehouse, one at the airstrip. Julian and Storm weren't officially assigned, but that didn't stop them. "You're not on the clock," one of the agents said, checking her gear. "No clearance." "Then arrest me later," Julian replied, loading a magazine into his pistol. The agent gave a half smile, a silent acknowledgement of the shared mission. "Suit up." At 10:14 p.m., a convoy of black SUVs rolled silently down the industrial road outside Savannah's eastern docks. Cranes towered above like metal skeletons in the fog. Warehouse 6A was dark, but two generators hummed low behind a side fence. Storm rode in the front seat beside Julian, wearing his old ballistic canine vest. Julian turned to him. "You ready, boy?" Storm looked back, his eyes focused tail-thumping once against the seat. "Good," Julian said. "Let's finish this." The agents moved like shadows, two teams flanking each side of the warehouse. Julian and Storm took the rear. At 10:29 p.m., the green light came through. "Go." The back door was locked, but rusted. Julian kicked it open with a crash, and Storm surged forward low and fast. Inside were crates, plastic sheeting, and rows of shipping containers. And a voice, soft, almost gentle, that cut through the silence. "I expected you, Mr. Thorne." From the shadows, she stepped forward. Dalia. Same coat, same braid, and in her hand a leather folder. Julian raised his gun. "Hands now?" She didn't flinch. "You're too late," she said quietly. "They're already gone." Storm stood growling between them, low and steady. "Gone where?" Julian demanded. She tilted her head. "They weren't meant to stay here. You of all people should understand supply and demand." "These are children." Julian snarled, his grip tightening on his pistol. "To you," she said. "To others, they're currency, loyalty, power. I'm honest." Julian's heart sank, but before he could react, one of the containers creaked. Storm lunged before Julian even gave the order, tackling Dalia hard as agents rushed in to cuff her. Julian ran to the container and pried it open. Huddled beneath a tarp were three children, all alive, all terrified. And one of them, a little girl with dark hair, looked up. "Mila," Julian whispered, kneeling. The girl's eyes were glassy but alert. Storm patted over, nudging her hand with his nose. She smiled, a fragile but unmistakable sign of hope. At the airstrip, the second team intercepted the jet moments before takeoff. Two pilots were arrested, but there were no passengers aboard. Dalia's plan had been to load the children and then fly out. She hadn't expected them to find the bunker or decode the route in time. The interrogation room was a sterile box of concrete and mirrors. Dalia said nothing, refusing a lawyer, food, or sleep. She just stared at the mirrored glass wall with an amused smirk, as if she knew something no one else did. Julian sat on his porch later that evening with Storm beside him. The wind was soft and fireflies blinked in the dark, but peace felt distant. "They said she didn't talk," Julian murmured to Storm. "But that look." He ran his hand over the old dog's head. "You knew it the second you saw her. I think this goes deeper. And she knows it's not over." The hospital smelled like bleach and lemon-scented cleaner, but to Julian Thorne, it might as well have smelled like hope. 2 days had passed since the warehouse raid. Mila had finally started eating again. Emiliano had begun to sleep without crying in the middle of the night. The third child, her name was Laia, had remembered enough to identify her hometown. Her family had been looking for her for nearly a year. In their hospital room, 3 coloring books lay open on the table, crayons spilled across the bed sheets. Storm lay on the floor between the beds, chin on his paws, his eyes always watching. A nurse whispered to Julian, "He doesn't sleep much." Julian smiled faintly. "He will when they do." But as Julian watched the children, a new unsettling detail emerged from the files seized from Dalia's bunker. The same phrase that had haunted him for days was there: transfer number 13, status deferred. A child still unaccounted for. Late that night, Reggie called. "Got something," he said, his voice tense. Customs flagged a container near the Louisiana coastline. Manifest was fake, but the timestamp matches the pattern. Julian's heart sank. "Another kid?" he asked. Reggie hesitated. "Maybe, but it's not local. The manifest was masked under a medical transport group, and it was inbound." "Inbound?" Julian sat up straighter. "You're saying they're not just exporting?" "Looks like they're bringing some back," Reggie confirmed. "And whoever this number 13 is, they're not like the others. He was the only one labeled to return, reclassified as deferred high asset." 3 days later, the task force descended on the Louisiana dock. Inside the container was a single boy alone, weak but alive. He didn't cry or speak, just looked at the agents with wide, silent, calculating eyes. His ID band, zip-tied to his wrist, read Subject 13 deferred. Julian went to see him the next morning. He stood outside the glass window for a long time. The boy was perhaps 9, skinny pale, but incredibly alert. He scanned everything, every nurse, every movement, every sound. He wasn't fearful. He was observing. "He's different," Julian murmured to Storm. Reggie's voice came from behind him. "Dalia wanted him back. He was the only one labeled to return. We don't know what high asset means yet." Inside the room, the boy looked up, his eyes meeting Storm's. Storm approached slowly. The boy didn't flinch. He reached out, and Storm let him touch his snout. Then, shockingly, the boy smiled a small, broken, but unmistakable smile. "First one he's shown," a nurse whispered. Julian watched carefully. He knew this wasn't the end of the story. Music. The score swells with emotion and a sense of both closure and a new beginning. That weekend, a private ceremony was held in Jasper. No cameras, no reporters. Just 3 children, a weathered veteran, a dog with gray around his muzzle, and a town that owed more than it knew. Julian deflected the praise, looking down at Storm. "He did," he replied. "All I did was follow." Later that evening, the sun set behind the pines. Julian sat on his porch, Storm at his feet, watching fireflies blink in the dusk. Dalia was behind bars, and the kids were safe, and yet something still gnawed at him. That boy number 13 wasn't like the others. Whatever Dalia had planned for him wasn't over. "You know this isn't done," Julian whispered to the old dog. Storm didn't move because he already knew. Across the country, in a secure federal holding center, Dalia sat in a concrete cell. The walls were blank, the lights always on. But she didn't sleep. She just stared, waiting. Because somewhere out there, another door would open, and someone else would look the other way. Thank you for staying with us through this emotional and powerful journey. We believe in honoring the silent heroes like Storm who listen, protect, and never give up on the innocent. Now we ask you, do you believe one dog and one child's whisper can expose something the whole world missed? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if you believe in stories that matter, don't forget to subscribe to Courage and Fur, because every bark has a reason, and sometimes it saves a life.